I'm Julie Banderas in for Shepard Smith today. We begin with breaking news. The communications director for Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore is out starting immediately. That is what a Moore campaign advisor tells Fox News, saying, quote, he did not have the experience to deal with the press. More on that in a moment. But first, President Trump has broken his silence on Moore, calling on voters not to pick his liberal rival, even after GOP leaders in Congress said Moore should quit the race. 4 women have accused Moore of sexual misconduct. One claims she was 14 and he was 32 when it happened. The president spoke with reporters as he left the White House. He did not call on Moore to drop out. Instead, the president repeatedly said the Alabama Republican denies the women's claims, and the president said he might campaign for Moore. In a local interview yesterday, Moore said he did not do anything wrong.
I never dated underage women, and I never engaged in sexual misconduct with anybody. I mean, you have to understand, I was deputy district attorney, then the circuit judge. I go by the law.
Voters in Alabama head to the polls in less than a month to replace Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And we have Team Fox coverage for you. Jonathan Seri is in Birmingham, Alabama. First to Phil Keating, though, live in West Palm Beach, Florida, not far from where the first family is celebrating Thanksgiving. Hey, Phil.
Hi, Julie. What an intriguing act it would be in the state of Alabama if, in fact, President Trump did go there in person to campaign and stump specifically for Roy Moore. Trump indicated yesterday we may learn something, whether he will or not, next week sometime. You know, of course, much of the GOP leadership has withdrawn its support for Roy Moore, with many top Senate leaders saying they absolutely have no reason to not believe Moore's accusers. Judge Moore, though, refuses to quit, saying the accusations are not true. And in the case of Beverly Young Nelson, who says Moore assaulted her when she was 16 and even signed her yearbook, he denied that was even his handwriting. President Trump appears to be giving Moore the benefit of the doubt here, not the women.
What is your message to the women, sir, during this pivotal moment in our country where we are talking about sexual misconduct? You had your own allegations against you.
Let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it.
And when Air Force One landed in West Palm Beach last night, Trump spent about 20 minutes on the tarmac with supporters and holiday well-wishers, and hundreds lined the road along his short motorcade route to Mar-a-Lago, waving flags and holding signs. A sampling of those signs: Blacks for Trump 2020, welcome home, Mr. President, we love you, Trump, and get off my lawn. And another one that just said, corrupt. Julie?
Phil, what do we know about the president's schedule while he's staying in Florida?
Well, supposedly he's going to be very low-key, but he's calling it a working vacation, really trying to rally Senate support to pass that big tax cut and tax reform bill sometime next week or the following week. That would fulfill a huge campaign promise by Trump if he could actually sign that tax package into law. He spent about 4 or 5 hours today at one of his golf clubs. However, despite repeated requests by the press corps to specify did he play golf or not, and if he did play golf, whom did he play with, the White House declined to respond. The president, though, emphasizing this is a working vacation with this tweet today, quote, "We'll be having meetings and working the phones from the winter White House in Florida. Stock market hit a new record high yesterday, $5.5 trillion gain since the election. Many companies coming back to the U.S., military building up and getting very strong. And we have just learned in the past hour or so that next week, specifically Wednesday, President Trump will be meeting in person with the Big Four, the top 4 Republican and Democratic leaders in Congress, to try to hammer out some sort of a budget deal to avert a government shutdown next month. The deadline is December 8th, so they have that date to either pass a short-term resolution or a much larger budget. Most likely it will be the short-term extension. Julie?
Phil Keating, thank you. Team Fox coverage continues now with Jonathan Seri live in Birmingham, Alabama. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Julie. Well, the Moore campaign says it continues gathering evidence to contradict those statements from Moore's accusers. In an interview with Scott Beeson, the conservative talk show host asked Moore whether he was considering legal action. Listen.
We're talking about the Washington Post. We're talking about the women involved. You know, it takes time to develop a case and file a case, because you just don't go file a case without some proof. And we're getting proof. We're getting things.
These allegations have changed the dynamics of a race that should have been an easy win for a Republican in this solidly red state. But even before the controversy, analysts say Democrats had planned to make a strong effort in Alabama, part of a national strategy to recruit solid candidates regardless of their chances of being elected.
Doug Jones was just going to demonstrate how well an Alabama Democrat could do, even though I think most people expected that he was going to fall short. Given the allegations against Roy Moore, that does inject some uncertainty into the race, and it certainly made this race much more competitive.
And Moore campaign advisor Brett Doster confirms to Fox News that John Rogers, the now former communications director of the Moore campaign, is stepping down, explaining, unfortunately, John just did not have the experience to deal with the press the last couple of weeks, and we've had to make a change. Doster says that he will be taking on more responsibilities when it comes to campaign communications, Julie.
And how was Roy Moore's opponent responding to the president's comments yesterday?
Yeah, President Trump described Doug Jones as a liberal and soft on crime. Here's what Doug Jones said to that.
I'm going to let the people of Alabama make that decision. I feel like my record speaks for itself, and I don't have to have the president or anyone else to talk about it or try to label it.
And Alabama voters will decide December 12th. Julie?
All right, Jonathan Seri in Alabama, thank you very much. Let's bring in Louise Radnofsky, White House reporter for our corporate cousin, the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So the president first came out and said that Roy Moore should step down. Remember when the allegations were new? If the allegations were true, he believed he should step down. But now he's changed his tune a bit. He says he believes him. Are you surprised?
Well, the White House has walked a very careful line on this. The most important message I think that we heard from the president yesterday was that in his eyes, maintaining a Republican majority in the Senate was going to take precedence over everything else. They'd left themselves a little bit of room to end up in that position by specifying that they only wanted to see Roy Moore step down if the allegations were proven to be true. And obviously, as you saw, by yesterday, the president had reached his own conclusion, at any rate, that that wasn't the case, and therefore he could continue to both somewhat implicitly argue for Mr. Moore and more directly argue against the candidacy of Doug Jones.
It's unfortunate to have to politicize these sexual allegations. However, politics are politics. And with that, the Democratic candidate, when you look at Doug Jones's record, not exactly glowing either. And unfortunately for the GOP, there's no time to find a replacement for Roy Moore, which is maybe why, I guess that's what led the president to say this yesterday about Moore's opponent. I want you to listen.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat. Jones, I've looked at his record. It's terrible in crime. It's terrible in the border. It's terrible in the military. I can tell you for a fact, we do not need somebody that's going to be bad on crime, bad on borders, bad with the military, bad for the Second Amendment.
So let me get this straight. Bad on crime, bad on the Second Amendment, bad on terrorism. So when weighing the cons between an alleged pedophile and a Democrat, the alleged pedophile wins.
Well, what you're hearing from Doug Jones is a lot of talk on the campaign trail, primarily about his record or his willingness to side with Democrats on kitchen table issues such as health care. He has, in the last couple of days, interestingly, leaned more towards mentioning the allegations against Mr. Moore, first in an ad that focused on other Republicans' condemnation of Mr. Moore, and more recently focusing on the accusers and highlighting the accusations that they brought against Mr. Moore.
Right. You know, it's interesting. We just heard an interview with Roy Moore, and he was talking about lawsuits, potential lawsuits, and defamation lawsuits. Look, you know, if these accusations and these allegations, to be perfectly fair, turn out to be false, let's say hypothetically speaking, there's no evidence to back them up. The question is, does he have a case? Because in an interview, he says, you know, the Washington Post, number one, and then the women involved. If for some reason it is found to be all untrue, and he says it takes time to get proof, does he sue?
Well, you've certainly heard the Washington Post say that it stands very vigorously behind its reporting. I think the other thing that you would want to bear in mind is that you did hear some of this echoed in what the president was saying yesterday, too. He certainly decided to make a point in weighing in on the veracity of these allegations in which he essentially said that they hadn't come out before now, and that Mr. Moore had been a fairly controversial and well-known candidate for a number of decades. And so in that sense, that's where the president fell down on that issue. You've heard from the Washington Post, and what you're hearing from a lot of folks in Alabama is that, and indeed outside of Alabama and Washington, is that they essentially want to leave this to Alabama voters to decide.
All right, Louise Radnofsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another sex harassment scandal hitting a sitting member of Congress, and now word of a second woman reportedly accusing Democrat John Conyers of harassment. This is the latest accusation, and what a House investigation could mean for the congressman's future. Next. Another woman has reportedly accused the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and longest-serving member in the House of sexual harassment, saying it happened repeatedly and daily. That's according to BuzzFeed News, citing court documents. BuzzFeed reports the woman was a former scheduler for Congressman John Conyers and filed a complaint even against him in D.C. in January. But when the court would not seal the case, she dropped it. According to BuzzFeed, the woman said Conyers made sexual advances toward her, along with inappropriate comments and touching. A spokesperson for Conyers responded to the article, pointing out the woman dropped the case, while the congressman has denied all past accusations against him. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live in Washington with the rest of this story. Mike.
Julie, good afternoon. After being accused of sexual harassment by multiple staffers and using money from his congressional office to settle, a Detroit Free Press editorial says it is time for Congressman John Conyers to go. Quote, "It is the kind of behavior that can never be tolerated in a public official, much less an elected representative of the people. And it means that whatever Conyers' legacy will eventually be, his tenure as a member of Congress must end now. Conyers is 88 years old and is the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Senior Democrats have called for an ethics probe, and a member of that committee says it will be a serious investigation."
I never discuss the details of the Ethics Committee, but I want to assure your viewers that it's completely bipartisan, 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. We have a nonpartisan staff, and we investigate situations all of the time.
Fox News has learned the Congressional Black Caucus has scheduled a 2-hour sexual harassment training for its members next Thursday. Conyers is the group's most senior member. Julie?
Tell us about the process for staffers to file a complaint against a member of Congress. How does that work?
Julie, it's very time-consuming and very involved. A staffer has 180 days after an alleged incident to give written notice to the Office of Compliance. Then there's a counseling process that typically lasts another 30 days, basically being advised of their rights. Then it's on a mediation for roughly another 30 days. That's when the staffer's office gets notified. The allegation and the case remain confidential in most cases. A sexual harassment attorney who has handled many of these cases involving congressional staffers says the system protects its own.
It's unfair to the staffers, it's unfair to the American public, and quite frankly, it's unfair to private employers who have to go through a much more transparent process. Congress passed the Congressional Accountability Act to say that they should be held to the same standards, and then they created a better standard for themselves by creating this opaque system.
And that attorney says it is virtually impossible for a staffer suing a senator or congressman to stay in his or her job. Julie?
Mike Emanuel, thank you. Well, Senator Rand Paul's wife says that there was no ongoing dispute with the neighbor charged with attacking her husband. Kelly Paul writing an op-ed even for CNN about the attack that left the Kentucky Republican with 6 broken ribs, water on the lungs, and now pneumonia. She called it, quote, deliberate and a blindside. It happened earlier this month while Senator Paul was cutting his grass. Now, other neighbors have said it was about a landscaping dispute, but Kelly Paul says the only dispute was in what she called the attacker's troubled mind. The suspect has pleaded not guilty. Well, there's word the special counsel running the Russia investigation has some questions about President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. Robert Mueller's investigators reportedly looking into Jared Kushner's contacts with foreign leaders before the president took office. That's next. Special Counsel on Russian meddling in the U.S. election and possible collusion are looking into the president's son-in-law and senior advisor. That is according to our corporate cousin, the Wall Street Journal. Now, the Journal is reporting investigators are asking about Jared Kushner's contacts with foreign leaders during the presidential transition. Kushner originally did not reveal those contacts when he applied for a security clearance. In fact, he later updated the form to add the contacts, but that was after the fact, calling it an administrative error. Let's bring in A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist at Real Clear Politics. She's also a host of No Labels Radio on Sirius's XM POTUS channel. Thank you very much for talking to us, A.B.
Thanks, Julie.
So, among the many things that Jared Kushner is under scrutiny for, Comey's firing, his financial dealings, his dealings with Russia. Where would you like to start?
Yes, and also this question of whether or not he was involved in some inappropriate way in a UN dispute last year at the behest of the Israeli government. It is clear from what has been revealed about the campaign's contacts with officials in other governments, foreign officials, Russian officials, that this has started when it became clear that Donald Trump could be the nominee, or even earlier. They were definitely making these connections throughout the summer of 2016 when he was nominated, and then into the fall, and especially during the transition. The idea that an American citizen who's not part of the government officially would be intervening in some kind of matter like this could violate what's called the Logan Act, but these things are rarely prosecuted. So right. I don't know that he's actually in any kind of legal peril there. But it is the list of things you mentioned that Jared Kushner has now been scrutinized for, particularly the idea that he would send off an application for security clearance for such an important position within the West Wing, and with access to classified information, without listing over 100 contacts with foreign officials, that really has drawn suspicion.
Yeah, you could say that. How much longer until there's so much pressure on the White House regarding Kushner's mishandling of his role as advisor and the distraction that it's causing? At what point does he remove himself, or does he stay no matter what?
Well, it's interesting. Vanity Fair is reporting that the president has asked his daughter and son-in-law to get out of the spotlight. He's worried about the negative coverage that they're receiving, and he doesn't like it, and even suggests that perhaps, according to this reporting, that they get out of the White House and move back to New York for a while. I don't know how much of that is true, but it is clear that you mentioned Jared Kushner had a vast portfolio of very significant responsibilities for which most of them have gone quiet. He has kept a very low profile, and I thought it was very rare to see his lawyer come out and defend him a few days ago, sort of a signal that they thought that that there were sort of the press reports and the news, the breaking on him had reached, too negative a point. But I think he's gone quiet. I don't know that they're ready to leave, but it certainly is the opinion of the president that he doesn't want his family in the headlines.
Well, he certainly is going to be loyal, and this is a president who boasts loyalty, and I admire anyone who does. But the meetings with Gorkov and Kislyak, that's one thing. The forwarded emails, the forgotten emails, I don't even know what to call them, that's another. Omitting facts is one thing. Lying is another. There is no proof that there's criminality involved here, but we know that there's dishonesty or just plain sloppiness. I don't know, but at which point do we know which is the case?
All right. Well, that's why the special counsel is going to want to talk to him, because the Senate staff committee, the committee staff that's interviewed Jared Kushner, did not get all the answers that they sought, and they did not get all the documents that they sought. And so we don't know, as you mentioned, that there's any kind of criminal exposure, but there is a difference between omitting and there's a difference in between lying and submitting false statements. And that's why he has now come under the scrutiny of the special counsel for all those reasons. The firing of Comey very specifically a part of the special counsel's examination into whether or not the president obstructed justice and received any advice on that from Comey. So, from Jared Kushner. So there's a long list of questions for him to be answering for sure.
All right. Investigation's got a lot of covering of that.
Long way to go.
Yeah, it's not near over. A.B. Stoddard, thank you very much. Always great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, the popular app Uber, I use it all the time. It just now admitted that hackers stole information from millions of customers, information that you actually put into your phone. And guess what? It didn't happen yesterday, not last week, a year ago. but we're just finding out about it today. I mean, but rather than tell customers, the company actually paid the criminals to cover it up. We've got Uber's response ahead. But first, word of an investigation into military members working at the White House. And it all has to do with women in Vietnam. That's next.
I'm Leah Gabriel with a Fox Report with some Thanksgiving holiday headlines. Check out the bumper-to-bumper traffic last night in L.A. People apparently trying to beat the rush. This Thanksgiving set to see the most travelers in more than a decade. That's according to AAA, which reports more than 51 million people will go more than 50 miles away from home between today and Sunday. AAA's numbers include folks traveling by train, plane, and even boat. But it reports most people will drive, even though gas is more expensive than last Thanksgiving. All the extra traffic could make travel times in some areas up to 3 times longer than usual. And at airports, TSA officials say they are bracing for a record 24 million passengers between last Friday and this Monday. They say Sunday will be the biggest travel day of the Thanksgiving stretch. As they put it in a statement, it's an all-hands-on-deck time of year. The news continues with Julie Banderas right after this.
Contact with foreign women, basically costing some White House workers their jobs. Fox News confirms the Pentagon is investigating 3 White House military personnel after President Trump's trip to Asia. The Washington Post was first to report this. A senior defense official telling Fox News the investigation is about the service members' contact with foreign women during the president's trip. And the personnel have been reassigned. Kevin Cork is live in Washington. Kevin.
Julie, I have to tell you, this is a very serious allegation. They don't take this sort of thing lightly. We'll tell you why in just a moment. But we're talking about some service personnel that face serious risk, not just to their careers. We're talking about facing a risk of losing their security clearance, facing administrative action, to say nothing of courts-martial. It is a very tough circumstance they find themselves in. Let me tell you what the Deputy Director, Defense Press Operations, Mark Wright, has to say about it at this hour. He says, look, we are aware of the incident, and it is currently under investigation. As you know, of course, the president visited Vietnam as part of a 12-day swing through Asia. We're talking about 3 military personnel. They have been reassigned, as you pointed out, from their White House jobs amid allegations they had improper contact with foreign women while traveling with the president. All of them, by the way, did work for the White House Communications Agency. That is a specialized military unit that helps with secure communication for the president, the vice president, Secret Service, and other officials. Now, this episode, Julie, comes after 4 military personnel on that very same White House team faced allegations related to their behavior during a trip to Panama back in August with Vice President Mike Pence. This is a serious problem. It also comes 5 years after a very high-profile episode involving Secret Service agents. You may remember that was, of course, a presidential detail back in 2012 with President Obama. 13 Secret Service agents back then were flown back to Washington from Colombia after being accused of taking prostitutes back to their hotel rooms. Now, again, let me underscore the seriousness of the allegations here. We're not just talking about courts-martial. We're talking about when you are on the road. You don't just represent yourself. You don't just represent your wife and your family or your husband, as the case may be. You represent the United States of America. And that's why these allegations are very serious. We'll continue to follow the investigation. I want to say a big thanks to Jennifer Griffin and our folks over the Pentagon with help on this story. Julie, back to you.
I mean, you're traveling with the president and you're representing America.
That's
and
right.
you take your job that seriously.
Yeah.
Quite a shame.
Yeah.
All right. Kevin, thank you. Rescuers are searching for 3 American sailors after a Navy plane crashed into the ocean more than 500 miles off the coast of Japan. That is according to Navy officials. It went down near Okinawa. The Navy reports the cargo plane was flying to an aircraft carrier in the Philippine Sea when it went down. Crews were able to rescue 8 sailors who managed to survive. Fox News Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson is reporting on the story. So, Lucas, what do we know about the crash, and do we know what caused it?
Well, Julie, it's been almost 15 hours since the crash, hundreds of miles at sea while flying out to the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan from Japan. Initial indications indicate some kind of engine failure aboard the plane, according to defense officials. Now, the U.S. Navy says that helicopters aboard the Reagan rescued 8 of the 11 sailors at sea less than an hour after the crash. 3 remain missing, and the search effort continues, although it's hampered by darkness. It will be daylight in the next hour in the search area. The 8 recovered sailors are in good condition back on board the aircraft carrier. The Navy C-2 Greyhound is a cargo plane that delivers passengers and supplies, including the mail, to aircraft carriers at sea. It first entered service in the late 60s and is scheduled to be replaced in the next few years. The crash occurred 575 miles southeast of Okinawa, Japan, Wednesday afternoon local time. The Japanese military is also assisting in the search for the 3 missing American sailors. The Navy plane crash comes 2 days after an Air Force training jet crashed, killing 1 pilot and injuring another in Texas. U.S. military plane crashes are up 38% this year compared to this point a year ago. Now in April, the Navy grounded its entire fleet of T-45 training jets, some 200 jets in all, following a Fox News report saying instructor pilots were refusing to fly them, citing poison in the plane's oxygen system. Talking about the crisis of naval aviation. Julie?
Lucas Tomlinson, thank you. New video shows a North Korean soldier making a daring escape into South Korea. We told you about this last week when it happened. Well, now the United Nations command that controls the border is releasing security footage. And the video shows the defector driving a Jeep south toward the military demarcation line. And he approaches a building controlled by the North, watch it there, and then speeds right past it. And now you can see one guard chasing after him. Well, eventually the Jeep crashes and the soldier runs away. And that's when 4 North Koreans start shooting at him. Benjamin Hall has more from our London news hub. So, Benjamin, do we know exactly how the North Korean soldier pulled this one off?
Well, Julie, frankly, a combination of luck, and luck, bravery perhaps as well. This is one of the most guarded, if not the most guarded and fortified borders in the world. Tens of thousands of troops on either side, and right through the middle of it, this young 24-year-old soldier just making a mad dash for freedom. It started, as you say, around 3 p.m. and we see this Jeep careering straight towards the border. It passes that guardhouse and then it crosses what was once known as the Bridge of No Return, before then getting stuck in a ditch right by the border. The North Koreans respond quickly, emerging from various buildings in the JSA and sprinting after him. They catch up to him right on the border and they fire 40 rounds at close range. But he keeps going and finally falls on the South Korean side. Some of the soldiers try to follow him before quickly turning back. It was only about 40 minutes later that 2 South Korean soldiers crawled up, grabbed hold of him and managed to drag him to safety. Now, this was only the 4th defection across the DMZ in 3 years. About 1,000 a year from North Korea in general, but very rare here. And this is also the first cross-border shooting in more than 3 decades. And the US military have said that by doing so, the North Koreans violated that 1953 armistice, both by shooting across into South Korea, but also by one of them actually crossing into the South. And they're arranging a meeting with the North next week to discuss those violations. Julie?
All right, Ben, thank you very much. Okay, turning now to Uber executives. You know the Uber hack? Do you use Uber? Well, you're probably one of millions, because Uber executives say that they have been in touch with attorneys general in several states after the company covered up a hacking that actually affected more than 57 million people. That's according to Reuters. It reports the executives say that they are ready to cooperate with investigations into the cyber attack, which happened a year ago. Uber CEO says that they have not found any evidence of anyone using the information maliciously. He also says the company paid the hackers $100,000 to destroy the info. Brad Larson is here. He is the morning anchor of Fox News Headlines 24/7 and a Fox technology reporter. Okay, so our emails, our customer names, our phone numbers are out. They pay $100,000. It's hush money, and it's okay.
From a year ago. So this happened a year ago, and 48 states have laws about data breaches and how you have to tell your customers about them. California, where Uber is based, if it's more than 500 users that have had their data compromised, you have to let them know in as timely a fashion as possible.
Yeah.
Well, waiting a year is not very timely, so that is going to be a problem for Uber going forward. And this comes on the heels of Uber having several other problems. They settled a huge FTC complaint. What's shocking to me is that they actually paid the hackers. Normally, the government says, don't do that, because that creates a business model for hackers. They get in, they take your data, it becomes ransomware. They say, if you want to see this data ever again, you're going to have to give us a lot of money. They did that to Netflix and HBO, and Netflix and HBO said, we're not going to pay you. and nothing came of it.
I mean, it's like somebody getting kidnapped and paying ransom money. Now, they paid them the ransom money, and they never did use the information maliciously.
Correct.
But what if, God forbid, they did? Could you imagine 57 million customers?
Exactly.
All of a sudden, all our personal information is out there, and you paid $100,000 and think that's good enough?
And all the bad press you're getting. And of the data that was compromised, 7 million of it was of their drivers, and more than 500,000 of their drivers' license numbers were in that data breach. Now, Uber has said, look, it's the names, it's the email addresses, it's your phone number. That's not the end of the world. But that is actually bad data to have floating around out there in the hands of hackers. The hackers could have said, yeah, sure, of course we deleted the data. And maybe it saved someone else.
So how do we know that our data is not still out there?
We don't know that. We're relying on the reported trust of hackers who have gotten in and breached your systems to steal all of this data.
I mean, the fortunate thing is that Social Security numbers, bank account numbers, that sort of thing.
Credit card
I mean, we all have our telephone and our bank account and my credit card information stored on every single car app. And with all the competition and all the mess ups that Uber has done, I mean, where does the customer get out of this? Nothing.
This is really what's so frustrating about these hacking stories. As a consumer, there is literally nothing you can do to prevent it.
I know. Call Lyft. Call Via.
Well, exactly. And
call Juno. I mean, there's a million other services.
And this is where companies are going to have to step up their efforts at protecting their consumers' data, because ultimately you're going to have to make the choice. Am I going to go with a company that had a data breach, or am I going to go with a company that thus far hasn't had a massive data breach?
It's such a hard, rock between a hard place, because this week, they're offering me a 60% discount, so my cars have been $1.50. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to use it.
Super saving money, but you could potentially have all of your information.
Yeah, I mean, the CEO comes out, and here's the statement that the CEO says. I want to put it up on the screen. Basically taking full responsibility for the cybersecurity moving forward. He says, while I can't erase the past, I can commit on behalf of every Uber employee that we will learn from our mistakes. Now, this Uber CEO is the new one, because the last one got canned. They have a great record. So in August, he took over. Correct. Now, let's just remember that Uber's record of hiring, first of all, is quite scary, considering New York City's biggest terror attack since 9/11 was an Uber driver. And it just kind of raises the risk of, when I get into an Uber, am I safe? And when does the CEO actually take responsibility?
And the previous CEO, got in an argument with an Uber driver and was caught on camera. So this is like several strikes against Uber. We're seeing a lot of this culture in these startups. It's not necessarily paying attention to the barn door when it's the fox guarding the hen house, as they say, and that's not to say that Uber has oversight or has overlooked their security practices, but clearly they left something open and someone was able to get into it, and that's bad for consumers, and it is also very bad for Uber. Several states' attorneys general have already stepped forward with lawsuits, including Massachusetts, New York, and California. So going forward, it's going to be tough for them.
Yeah, I mean, they are a big company, but they're a big company, so this could have happened to any other company, for the record. I mean, if they can hack into Uber, they can hack into anyone else.
They really can.
They chose Uber because it is the most well-recognized worldwide.
It's why you have problems with Windows and not Macintosh. There's more users.
Yeah, that is true. I'm still trying to break into Apple. I'm just not very Apple friendly.
It's really easy.
I know, but I'm old. All right, Brett Larson, good to see you.
Good to see
you in here. Well, drones are becoming more and more dangerous. We have seen them fly close to firefighters, near planes, and over SWAT teams standoffs. Well, coming up, the technology that could help first responders knock the drones out of the sky. First responders say drones are putting lives at risk, and they're looking for ways to protect people. They say people are actually flying drones right over emergency situations, including fires and hostage standoffs, and causing all sorts of problems and disruptions. Leah Gabriel with the news. Hey, Leah.
Hey, Julie. First responders that I spoke with tell me that most operators do follow the limited rules in place for flying drones, but they say the negligent are getting in the way, and that the criminals and potential terrorists have an upper hand against those responsible for protecting our public.
Some of these drones can fly anywhere from 1 to 15 pounds of explosives, which is a huge amount of explosives.
Sergeant Randy Sterrett is a bomb squad commander in California's Orange County, one of many places where UAVs or drones have become a dangerous nuisance to law enforcement and other first responders.
The drone was spotted in the fire burn area.
Just a single drone can do significant damage or even take one of our aircraft out of the air.
According to the Department of the Interior, last year there were over 40 reported drone incidents near wildfires. In 2015, California's North Fire torched nearly 24 vehicles on a major highway in San Bernardino County.
We had drone operations that had actually forced us to shut down all of our air operations. I don't believe we would have seen hardly any vehicles be damaged if we'd had the ability to bring in aircraft and redirect the fire.
First responders say they are only seeing an increase in dangerous incidents with drones, and they need a way to fight back, both in the interest of the public safety and their own.
There are companies making technology to do just that.
That red light means I am now disrupting all of the drones that are in about a 30-degree arc in front of my unit.
IXI Technology recently demonstrated their so-called drone killer to first responders. It sends a radio signal on the same frequency as the drone's control device, causing most drones to go back where they took off from. If that doesn't work, the device can jam the drone's GPS signal and force it to land. The trouble is, federal regulations prohibit this type of countermeasure without special authorization.
There's been the SWAT operation going on and a UAV flying right into the front yard and watching as they're approaching the house, putting their safety and the safety of those in the community at risk.
Drones are an emerging technology, and as such, they're coming into a regulatory arena that's not yet fully developed.
Senator Mike Lee, along with other lawmakers, introduced a bipartisan bill that would give local governments the power to regulate in their own regions for drones flying below 200 feet.
It's so unfair that a citizen, a criminal, or a terrorist can use UAV technology, but we cannot use technology against them.
Well, only a few states even have laws that allow first responders to use technology to disable drones, and most apply just to fighting fires. And Julie, even just trying to track down people who fly drones into operations is very difficult, and that's because unlike manned aircraft, where you have to have a tail number that's registered, there is no such requirement for small recreational drones.
And regardless of whether a human is inside a drone, they're operating it just like a pilot would a plane.
Yeah.
I can't understand why there aren't tougher regulations on these things when clearly they could cost lives. They could be used to harm and damage people and their property. It's very boggling.
You know, this is one of the problems with emerging technology, is that oftentimes regulations get behind the times, and this is a point we're getting to where federal regulators need to get involved and they need to make some decisions pretty quick here.
All right, Leah Gabriel, thank you. Well, Leah reported earlier on the tens of millions set to travel this Thanksgiving. We're going to take a look at how the weather is shaping up and where people might run into trouble. That's next.